Lesson 17. A complete review for the final exam. Lesson 18. A free conversation. Part 1. The dialogues. Definition 2. Where were you born? I was born in a small town in North Vietnam in 1974. The population of the town at that time was about 80,000. There were very few big buildings in the town. The tallest building was the city hall. The town was quiet at night. Around 8 p.m., people went to bed or stayed in their houses. The streets were almost deserted, and there was almost no night entertainment. Theaters or restaurants usually closed at 7:30 p.m. Finger game 3. Tell me a significant event that you still remember. One day, I went with my mother to see my grandparents who were living in the countryside. At around 5 p.m., we hurried to catch the last bus to go home. When we were about 1 kilometer to our house, the bus suddenly broke down. The driver tried to fix it with no success. My mother and I decided to walk home. While we were walking on the deserted road, I was very much afraid and cried. My mother had to hold my hand. Suddenly, I saw some shadowy figures ahead of me. They were standing in an alley that ran into the road which we were walking on. My mother saw them too and started to hold my hand more tightly. From the shadows, I heard voices calling to us. We started to walk faster. The shouts got louder and louder as we walked faster and faster. Soon we had to run. But the faster we ran, the closer the voices were getting. Finally, we could no longer run. My mother stopped and stood in front of me. "What do you want?" she yelled in a menacing voice. Hiding behind my mother, I looked around her, but saw nobody. Everything turned silent. All the shadows had disappeared. We turned around and continued walking home fast. Were they scared of my courageous mother? Or were they just ghosts? I'll never forget that night and the way my mother protected me. Did you finally know what really happened? No, I didn't. But if I hadn't gone that day with my mother to see my grandparents, nothing would have happened. If we hadn't waited until 5 p.m. to go home, we wouldn't have had to hurry to catch the last bus. If the bus hadn't suddenly broke down and the driver hadn't tried to fix it with no success, my mother and I wouldn't have decided to walk home. If I hadn't been afraid, my mother wouldn't have had to hold my hand tightly. When I saw some shadowy figures standing in an alley that ran into the road, my mother saw them too. If my mother hadn't seen them, she wouldn't have had to hold my hand more tightly. If we hadn't heard voices from the shadows calling to us, we wouldn't have walked faster. If the shouts hadn't gotten louder and louder, we wouldn't have had to walk faster and faster, and later on, we wouldn't have had to run. Had we not been able to run, my mother wouldn't have stopped and stood in front of me and yelled, "What do you want?" If she hadn't shouted, the ghosts might not have disappeared. If my mother hadn't told me that she too saw the shadowy figures, I wouldn't believe the story now. And finally, had this incident not happened, I wouldn't have known how much my mother loved me and how she protected me. I love my mother very much. Absolutely. Where did you go to elementary school? I attended a small elementary school in the countryside. There were only about 14 students in my 4th grade and 10 students in my 5th grade. All the students came from the poor families in the surrounding villages because the rich usually sent their kids to the city. My school was a small brick house of 3 classrooms and another small room for an administration office. The principal and two of the teachers were my distant cousins. Finger game 3. Tell me a significant event that you still remember. Well, when I was in my 4th grade, I used to be the best student in my class. I almost always got the first prize in any contest. However, one day, the teacher asked each of us to sing a song. Everybody else did very well, except me. When it was my turn to sing, the teacher and all my friends started to laugh because my voice was as hoarse as that of a duck. I was very much ashamed and decided to learn to sing. Now I'm a musician and I can sing very well. If I hadn't been the best student, I wouldn't have been ashamed when people laughed at me because I couldn't sing. If I hadn't been so ashamed, I wouldn't have decided to learn music, and I wouldn't be a musician now. Definition 2. Where did you go to high school? I went to the biggest public high school in my district. It was also the biggest school in my town, but it was very far from my house. Despite the fact that the school was about 10 kilometers from my house, I had to walk to school every day, 6 days a week. I usually walked to school with my other high school friends. Once in a while, I asked my uncle to take me on his bicycle. Tell me a significant event that you still remember. Well, I was very good at mathematics then. During my senior year, I designed a calculator and a company bought my formula for $5,000. With the money, I bought a piece of land from my parents in the city, and they were very happy. Really? Yes. Had I not been good at mathematics, I wouldn't have been able to design the calculator. Had I not designed the calculator, I wouldn't have had the formula to sell to a company for $5,000. And had I not had the money, I wouldn't have been able to buy the piece of land in the city for my parents, and they wouldn't have been very happy. Definition 1. What have you been doing since you graduated? I graduated in 1995 as an electronic engineer. I was very lucky. First, I graduated a semester early because I did very well in college, and I got extra credits for my invention of the calculator. Later, my invented calculator became famous, and the same company which had purchased the formula for $5,000 paid me a good royalty and asked me to invent a processor for them. As inventing a machine was not easy, I had to decline their request. Inasmuch as I wanted to be near my parents, I then applied for a job in Hanoi, and I've been working there since. Hanoi's 25 kilometers from my poor little town. Tell me a significant event that you still remember. Well, I just missed the train. When I was in Hanoi, I used to take the train to Saigon. Last month I missed the train for the first time in my life. That morning, I woke up very early to catch the morning train to the south. When I was brushing my teeth, my brother suddenly screamed. He told me that he had eaten something strange and that he would need to see a doctor. In order to get some medications for him, I had to go to a drugstore near my house, but it was closed. Finally, I had to take him to my cousin, who is a doctor. He treated my brother and gave him some medication. Then I took my brother home. It was almost 9 a.m. when I came home, and the last train to Saigon would leave in about half an hour, so I rushed to the train station. Fortunately, I got there in time and met my father, who had gone there to buy the train ticket for me. He was waiting for me at the gate. However, about 5 minutes before the train departed, my father asked me where my briefcase was. I then realized that I had left it at home. I couldn't go without the briefcase, which contained all my important papers. Therefore, I had to return home to get it. I missed the last train to Saigon on that day. Interesting. Well, if I hadn't been in Hanoi, I wouldn't have had to take the train to Saigon that morning. If my brother hadn't gotten sick, he wouldn't have needed a doctor. If he hadn't needed medications, I wouldn't have gone to a drugstore near my house. And if the drugstore hadn't been closed, I wouldn't have had to take him to my cousin who was a doctor. If I hadn't taken my brother to my cousin the doctor, it wouldn't have been 9 a.m. when I got to the train station. I would have been there sooner. And if I hadn't sent my father to the station to buy the tickets for me, he wouldn't have been waiting there when I arrived. However, about 5 minutes before the train departed, my father asked me where my briefcase was. I then realized that I'd left it at home. Had I not left my briefcase at home, I wouldn't have had to miss the train. Part 2. Pair work or group work on the following topics. 1. Where you were born and lived. Talk about the place, then tell me a significant event during this time. 2. Where you went to elementary school. Talk about the school, then tell me a significant event during this time. 3. Where you went to high school and university. Talk about the high school and the university. Then tell me a significant event during this time. 4. What you've been doing since you graduated. Talk about what you've been doing. Then tell me a significant event or incident. For each period of your life, use definitions 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And for each significant event, use finger game 3. Part 3. Practice writing business letters. Practice writing the following letters in class. A letter confirming an appointment. A letter accepting the terms of a business transaction. A letter of invitation. Other letters suggested by students and teacher.